The courthouse felt colder than it should have, the kind of cold that slipped through fabric and settled into bones. Wooden benches stretched in neat rows, polished smooth by decades of restless hands and nervous shifting. The air carried a quiet tension, not loud or dramatic, but heavy, like everyone inside knew something important was about to be decided and no one wanted to breathe too hard and disturb it. At the back of the room, near the exit where people came and went without being noticed, a man in a dark blue janitor's uniform stood with his shoulders slightly hunched. His mop rested against the wall beside him, the bucket tucked neatly out of the way. The uniform was clean but worn, faded at the seams, the fabric softened by years of washing. His hands were rough, knuckles thickened from labor, fingernails trimmed short out of habit. He looked like someone the world had learned to overlook. He hadn't planned to be here long. He had only meant to sit quietly at the back, listen, and leave before anyone asked questions. That was how he lived now, quiet, careful, invisible. After finishing his night shift, he had dropped his daughter at school just as the sun rose, her small hands slipping from his as she ran toward her friends. She had smiled back at him, unaware of the storm gathering in his chest. He had promised her dinner, promised he would be there. Promises mattered to him. They were one of the few things he still controlled. At the front of the courtroom, a young woman stood alone behind the defense table. She wore a plain blouse and slacks, professional but modest, as if trying not to draw attention to herself. Her hair was pulled back tightly, not a strand out of place, yet her hands betrayed her calm. They trembled slightly as she clasped them together, fingers interlocking, unclasping, then locking again. Her eyes stayed forward, fixed somewhere just above the judge's bench, as if afraid that meeting anyone's gaze might break her. She had been accused of stealing money, large amounts, the kind that made headlines and satisfied public hunger for scandal. Corporate fraud. Betrayal of trust. The words sounded heavier each time they were spoken, piling onto her shoulders until it seemed impossible she could still be standing. The prosecutor spoke with practiced confidence, his voice smooth and controlled. He paced slowly, like a man who already knew the outcome. Each sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through the room. "You had access," he said. "You authorized transactions. You signed approvals. And now millions are missing." The young woman swallowed. Her lips parted, then pressed together again before she forced the words out. She explained procedures, protocols, how she followed instructions passed down to her. She spoke clearly, carefully, as if choosing the wrong word might condemn her. A soft murmur drifted through the gallery. Not sympathy, skepticism. In the front row sat a man in an expensive suit, the kind tailored to fit perfectly, the fabric catching the light with quiet luxury. His posture was relaxed, almost bored. One arm rested along the back of the bench, his fingers tapping once, twice, then still. He watched the proceedings with a detached calm, as though this were a formality rather than a threat. Power sat easily on him. It showed in the way he didn't need to speak to command attention. At the back, the janitor's jaw tightened. He had seen this man before, though never like this. Not in public, not under scrutiny. Only in reflections on polished glass, in late-night offices lit by city glow, in conversations people thought were swallowed by empty hallways. The judge leaned forward, fingers steepled. His expression suggested patience wearing thin. He had heard cases like this before. Paper trails, accusations, denials. Most ended the same way. "Unless the defense has something new to present," the judge said, "we will move toward closing arguments." The defense attorney glanced down at his notes, then at the woman beside him. His shoulders slumped just a fraction. It was enough. The janitor felt a pressure build in his chest, sharp and insistent. He had tried to ignore it since the moment the charges were read. He had told himself it wasn't his place, that this was not his life anymore. He had a daughter to think about. A job that barely paid the bills but kept the lights on. He had learned, the hard way, what happened when people like him spoke too loudly. But he had also learned what happened when they stayed silent. A memory flickered, nights spent pushing the same mop down these same hallways, the echo of voices drifting from offices left unlocked. Words meant to vanish into the dark. Numbers. Instructions. Promises made with the assumption that no one listening mattered. The woman's shoulders sagged as the weight of the room pressed in on her. She looked smaller somehow, like someone already bracing for impact. The janitor's hands clenched into fists. His shoes scraped softly against the marble as he stepped forward. The sound was barely noticeable, lost in the shifting of bodies and quiet whispers. No one turned at first. He took another step. Then another. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure others could hear it. "I'll defend her." The words burst out of him, rough and unpolished, cutting clean through the air. Silence slammed down like a dropped curtain. Every head turned at once. The bailiff was already moving, hand reaching for his radio, eyes sharp with authority. "Sir, you need to sit down." The judge frowned, startled. "Who is this?" The janitor didn't sit. His breath came fast, his chest rising and falling as years of restraint cracked open all at once. "I said I'll defend her." A ripple of disbelief swept through the gallery. A few people laughed under their breath. Someone whispered something that sounded like a joke. The man in the expensive suit finally turned around. For a split second, the mask slipped. His confident calm fractured, replaced by something raw and unmistakable. His eyes widened just enough to give him away. The color drained from his face, leaving it pale beneath the courtroom lights. The janitor saw it. And in that instant, he knew he had waited long enough. The bailiff's hand closed around his arm. The judge raised a hand. "Wait." The room held its breath, suspended on the edge of something no one had expected. The grip on his arm tightened, firm but not yet rough, the kind meant to warn rather than punish. He could feel the bailiff's fingers through the thin fabric of his sleeve, a silent reminder of where he stood in the order of things. Around him, the courtroom buzzed softly, whispers slipping from mouth to mouth like sparks searching for something dry enough to catch fire. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, recovering quickly, "this man has no standing here. He's disrupting the court." The judge's eyes stayed fixed on the man in the janitor's uniform. There was annoyance there, yes, but also curiosity. "You said you would defend her? On what grounds?" The question hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. He swallowed, aware of every eye drilling into him now. His throat felt dry, his pulse loud in his ears. He had spoken without planning the next step, driven by something deeper than logic. But now that he stood exposed, there was no turning back. "I know what happened," he said. His voice wavered slightly at first, then steadied. "I know she didn't steal anything." A laugh broke out, sharp and dismissive. It came from somewhere near the middle rows, followed by a few murmurs of agreement. People shook their heads. A janitor claiming knowledge of a multi-million-dollar fraud case felt absurd to them, almost insulting. The bailiff tugged his arm again. "Sir, this is your last warning." At the front, the man in the expensive suit leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His fingers laced together tightly, knuckles widening. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "This is getting ridiculous," he said calmly. "I've never seen this man before in my life." The words landed like a challenge. The man in the janitor's uniform felt something twist in his chest. He looked straight at the suit, unblinking. "That's not true." A hush fell again, thicker this time. The judge leaned back slightly. "You're making serious claims. If you continue, you will need to explain yourself." He nodded once. "I will." The prosecutor stepped forward, irritation sharp in his tone. "Explain how a maintenance worker thinks he has insight into executive-level decisions." Maintenance worker. The phrase stung, not because it was false, but because of the way it was said, like a verdict. He let out a slow breath. "Because I work nights. Because I clean offices after everyone leaves. Because people talk when they think no one important is listening." A few heads tilted. Interest sparked despite skepticism. The prosecutor scoffed. "You expect us to believe you overheard classified financial dealings while emptying trash?" He didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted to the young woman at the defense table. She was staring at him now, confusion and desperation flickering across her face. She didn't know him. She had no reason to trust him. That made what he was doing even harder. "I don't expect belief," he said quietly. "I expect the truth to matter." The bailiff hesitated, glancing at the judge. The grip on his arm loosened slightly. The judge tapped his pen once against the bench. "Proceed." "Carefully." A low murmur rolled through the room. Cameras shifted. Reporters leaned forward, sensing something unexpected unfolding. He took a step closer, the echo of his shoes loud in the sudden quiet. "I've been cleaning this building for years. I've seen schedules, calendars, documents left open on desks. I've heard phone calls. Late night ones. The kind where voices drop and names are spoken like weapons." The man in the suit shifted in his seat, crossing his arms now, jaw clenched. The prosecutor shook his head. "This is speculation. It's observation," he replied. "And memory." A woman in the gallery whispered, "Why would he lie?" Another voice answered, "Why would anyone listen to him?" He felt the sting of that second question more sharply. It wasn't new. It echoed years of being overlooked, dismissed, erased. Still, he stood there, refusing to shrink. "I heard instructions given," he continued. "I heard someone say the paperwork would trace back to her. That she was reliable. That she wouldn't ask questions." The young woman's breath caught audibly. Her hands flew to her mouth, eyes filling with tears. The man in the suit rose to his feet. "This is outrageous," he snapped. "Your Honor, this man is lying. He's trying to derail the trial." The judge raised a hand, silencing him. "Sit down." The command cut through the room, surprising even those used to authority. The man hesitated, then slowly lowered himself back into his seat, his composure cracking just enough for others to notice. The prosecutor turned back to the witness stand area, irritation deepening into concern. "Do you have any proof of these alleged conversations?" He paused. The room leaned in. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the balance between everything he could lose and everything already lost. His daughter's face flashed in his mind. Her laugh. Her trust. He thought of the nights he'd come home exhausted, hands aching, wondering if silence was safer. "I do," he said. The word landed hard. A collective intake of breaths swept through the courtroom. The judge straightened. "What kind of proof?" He reached into the pocket of his jacket, the fabric brushing against his knuckles. For a split second, doubt flickered. He could still stop. Apologize. Walk away. Return to invisibility. Instead, his fingers closed around the small object inside. He pulled it out slowly, holding it up between his thumb and forefinger. A simple, battered storage drive. Nothing flashy. Nothing that looked like power. But power rarely did. "I saved what I heard," he said. "And what I saw." The prosecutor's confidence wavered. "That would have required illegal recording." "Only if it wasn't already recorded," he replied. "Security systems run all night. Someone forgot that." The man in the suit stood again, this time unable to control it. "This is a violation of privacy." He met his gaze calmly. "So is framing someone for a crime they didn't commit." The judge's expression hardened. "Bailiff, take the device." The bailiff released his arm entirely now and stepped forward, carefully accepting the drive. As it left his hand, a strange calm settled over him, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. The gallery erupted into whispers. Phones vibrated. Pens scratched furiously across notepads. The young woman stared at him, tears spilling freely now. She whispered something he couldn't hear, but her lips formed the shape of "thank you." The man in the suit sank back into his chair, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the small object being carried toward the bench. The judge looked down at it, then up at the room. "We will review this evidence." He paused, gaze sweeping over the courtroom. "And until then," he added, This court will remain in session. The tension didn't break. It tightened, coiling around everyone present. Because for the first time since the trial began, the outcome was no longer certain. The room felt smaller as the minutes stretched on, like the walls had leaned in to listen. No one spoke while the evidence was prepared. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It buzzed with restrained energy, the kind that made people shift in their seats and clear their throats too often. Every movement sounded louder than it should have, the shuffle of papers, the hum of the projector warming up, the faint squeak of a chair leg against the floor. He stood where he was told to stand, hands clasped loosely in front of him. His palms were damp, but his posture stayed straight. Years ago, he might have filled the silence with explanations, with apologies meant to soften others. He had learned not to do that anymore. Silence, when held with purpose, could be stronger than any speech. At the defense table, the young woman sat rigid, eyes fixed on the small screen as if her life depended on it, because it did. She didn't look at him now. Not because she doubted him, but because she was afraid of hoping. The man in the expensive suit sat very still. Too still. His confidence had evaporated, replaced by something brittle. His foot tapped once, then stopped. His jaw worked as if he were chewing on words he couldn't say aloud. The judge nodded toward the clerk. "Play it." A soft click echoed through the speakers. For a moment, there was only static. Then a voice filled the courtroom, low, controlled, unmistakably familiar. "Make sure it routes through her credentials." A murmur rippled through the room. The voice continued clearer now. Calm. Precise. The kind of voice people trusted because it sounded like it always knew what it was doing. "She won't question it. She never does." The young woman gasped, a sharp sound she couldn't suppress. Her hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled instantly, not from fear now, but from the shock of recognition. She knew that voice. She had heard it so many times, issuing instructions she believed were legitimate. The man in the suit shot to his feet. "This is manipulated." The judge slammed the gavel once. "Sit down." The voice played on. "If anything goes wrong, the trail leads to her. I'll handle the rest." Silence followed, thick and suffocating. The judge's face had gone rigid. "Pause." The clerk froze the recording. The prosecutor stood slowly, his earlier certainty gone. He turned toward the defense table, then toward the man in the suit, uncertainty flickering across his features. The man in the suit laughed nervously. "Anyone could splice audio." He finally spoke again, his voice steady but heavy. "There's more." He reached into his pocket once more, pulling out a folded sheet of paper. He hadn't planned to show it yet, but the moment demanded it. "Email logs. Timestamps. Correspondence matching the audio." The prosecutor took the paper, scanning it quickly. His brow furrowed. He flipped to the next page, then the next. His expression shifted from skepticism to disbelief. "This matches," he said quietly. The man in the suit shook his head, stepping back as if distance might save him. "This is a setup." He looked at the man in the janitor's uniform now, eyes sharp with accusation. "You did this. You've been planning this." For the first time since he had spoken up, the man allowed himself a small, humorless smile. "No," he said. "You did. I just listened." The judge leaned forward. "Explain your involvement." The question wasn't hostile. It was searching. He drew in a slow breath. This was the part he hadn't wanted to say out loud. The part he had buried under years of routine and survival. "I didn't always clean floors," he said. A ripple of surprise moved through the gallery. "I used to sit in meetings like this," he continued, gesturing vaguely toward the front of the room. "Different chair. Different badge. I worked in compliance. Risk analysis. I was good at it." The man in the suit stared at him now, eyes narrowing, recognition struggling to surface. "I raised concerns," he went on. "About shortcuts. About numbers that didn't add up. I was told to let it go." He paused, swallowing. "I didn't." The courtroom was silent. "I was pushed out," he said, quietly. "My reputation followed me. Doors closed. Calls stopped coming back." The man in the suit laughed bitterly. "You're blaming me for your failures?" He met his gaze without blinking. "I'm explaining them," the judge interjected. "And after that?" He glanced down at his hands, then back up. "I had a child to raise. Bills to pay. So I took the work I could get." He gestured around the room. "I cleaned the same offices where I once gave presentations. I listened while people joked about how easy it was to move money if you knew the system." The young woman looked at him, then, truly looked at him, seeing past the uniform for the first time. Her breathing hitched as understanding dawned. The man in the suit's face twisted with anger and something else, fear edged with guilt. "You should have moved on." "I did," he replied softly. "Just not away from the truth." The judge signaled for the audio to resume. Another recording played, this one longer. Instructions. Clarifications. Laughter at the end of a call, casual and confident. "She'll take the hit. She always does." The words echoed like a final blow. The prosecutor exhaled slowly. "Your Honor," he said, voice measured, "in light of this evidence, I request a recess to reassess the charges." The judge nodded once. "Granted." He turned to the defense table. "You may step down." The young woman stood on unsteady legs. As she passed him, she hesitated. Her voice shook. "Why me?" He answered without hesitation. "Because you were diligent. Because you trusted authority. Because you were convenient." Tears spilled freely now, but she nodded, as if the truth, painful as it was, gave her something solid to stand on. The judge addressed the room again. "This court will reconvene shortly." As people rose from their seats, voices burst forth all at once. Reporters rushed toward the doors. Phones came out. News spread faster than anyone could contain it. The man in the suit remained seated, staring at the table in front of him. His hands trembled now, his composure fully shattered. The bailiff approached him, speaking quietly. When he looked up, his eyes met the janitor's one last time. "You think this makes you a hero?" He considered the question, then shook his head. "No." He watched as the man was escorted away, the weight of consequences finally settling in. At the defense table, the young woman stood alone for a moment, then turned back to him. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "What happens now?" He straightened his shoulders. "Now," he said, "the truth finishes what it started." And for the first time since the trial began, Hope didn't feel foolish. The courtroom filled again with a different kind of energy, one that didn't buzz with uncertainty anymore but throbbed with anticipation. People returned to their seats quickly, whispers sharper, eyes brighter. The story had already escaped the walls of the building, spilling into phones and headlines outside, but inside, the truth still waited for its final word. He stood where he had before, posture steady, though exhaustion crept into his bones. It wasn't the kind of tired that came from long shifts or sleepless nights. It was deeper, like something that had been clenched inside him for years had finally loosened, leaving him hollow and light at the same time. The young woman sat beside her attorney now, no longer alone in spirit. Her hands still trembled, but they trembled with release instead of fear. Every so often, she glanced at him, as if grounding herself in the reality that she was no longer standing on the edge by herself. The man in the expensive suit was brought back and under watch. The way he walked had changed. His shoulders slumped slightly, his steps slower, measured. The confidence that once wrapped around him like armor had fallen away, exposing a man who suddenly understood what it meant to be seen clearly. The judge entered, and the room rose to its feet. "Be seated," he said. Silence followed, dense and focused. The prosecutor stood, clearing his throat. His voice was different now, too. No performance. No certainty. Just responsibility. "After reviewing the evidence presented," he began, "this office finds that the charges against the defendant are unsupported." A collective gasp swept through the room. He continued, Further investigation indicates deliberate misconduct by executive leadership, including manipulation of financial records and intentional misdirection of responsibility. The young woman pressed both hands to her face as tears finally broke free. Her shoulders shook, and the sound that escaped her was part sob, part laugh, the release of someone who had been holding their breath for far too long. The judge nodded slowly. The charges against the defendant are dismissed. The gavel came down once, firm and final. In that sound, something broke open. People spoke at once. Some clapped before remembering where they were. Others wiped their eyes. Cameras clicked rapidly, capturing the moment that would be replayed over and over again. The judge raised his hand for quiet. As for the evidence presented regarding executive misconduct, this court orders immediate referral for criminal prosecution. The man in the suit swayed slightly as the words hit him. His lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently, but it no longer mattered. The protection he had built around himself had collapsed under the weight of his own actions. The judge turned his attention to the man in the janitor's uniform. You stepped forward today at considerable personal risk. He felt the eyes of the room settle on him again, but this time, the weight was different. It didn't press him down. It lifted him. You demonstrated courage, the judge continued, and integrity. This court recognizes your contribution to justice. He nodded once, not trusting himself to speak yet. The young woman stood and walked toward him slowly, as if afraid the moment might shatter if she moved too fast. When she reached him, she stopped, searching his face. I don't know how to thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. He shook his head gently. You don't owe me anything. But you stood up, she insisted. When no one else would. He smiled faintly. Someone once should have done the same for me. She swallowed hard, then reached out, hugging him before either of them could think twice. The gesture was spontaneous, human, and it drew a ripple of warmth through the room. Outside, the courthouse steps were packed. Reporters shouted questions. Microphones were thrust forward. Cameras rolled. He shielded his eyes from the sudden brightness as he stepped into the sunlight. It felt warmer than it had that morning, as if the world itself had shifted slightly in response to what had happened inside. Sir? Someone called out. Why did you do it? He paused, considering the question. Because the truth doesn't need permission to be spoken. Another voice shouted. What's next for you? He glanced down at his phone, which buzzed in his pocket. A message from his daughter lit up the screen. Did you come to my school thing today? His chest tightened. He typed back quickly. I'm on my way now. He looked up again. I'm going home. The crowd parted as he walked away, the noise fading behind him. That evening, the small apartment felt different. Lighter. The walls no longer seemed to close in on him. He cooked dinner while his daughter sat at the table, chattering about her day, unaware of how close her world had come to changing forever. She looked up at him suddenly. Dad, my teacher said you were on the news? He smiled. Did she? She nodded enthusiastically. She said you were brave? He knelt beside her, meeting her eyes. Do you know what brave really means? She shook her head. It means doing the right thing even when you're scared. She thought about that, then smiled. Then you're brave all the time. Later that night, after she fell asleep, he stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker. Somewhere out there, people were still working late, still talking in quiet rooms, still believing their voices didn't matter. His phone buzzed again. A message from the young woman. They're reopening positions in compliance. I told them about you. He stared at the screen for a long moment. He didn't know what the future held. He only knew that silence was no longer part of it. The next morning, he returned to the courthouse, not to clean, but to walk past it with his head high. People nodded at him now. Some smiled. Some looked away, uncomfortable with their own past indifference. He didn't need their approval. He had reclaimed something far more important. As he walked on, the words echoed quietly inside him, steady and certain. Justice doesn't always arrive dressed in power. Sometimes it shows up in worn shoes, carrying a mop, and finally deciding to speak.